Hello, everybody, and welcome to Global Supply Chains, a series of lightning talks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our colleagues and friends joining us from all over the world for this series of talks. My name is Tamara Leonard, and I'm the Managing Director of the Center for Global Studies at the University of Washington's Jackson School of International Studies. I'm joined by my colleagues, Carla Ruffer, Outreach Coordinator for the Center for European Studies, University of Florida, Deborah Jane, Outreach Coordinator, Institute for Global Studies, University of Minnesota, and Emma Harver, Director of Outreach for the Duke UNC Consortium of Middle East Studies. The speakers in this series of lightning talks will discuss supply chains and logistics as related to Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown, shortages or interruptions of the supply chain affect communities around the globe, making an understanding of global supply chains and logistics even more relevant in our contemporary world. We're happy you feel the same way, and we're happy to see you here. Just a brief note about housekeeping. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes. These talks are designed to provide flashes of information and insight. As a result, we won't be doing Q&A, but you're welcome to follow up with presenters independently or to reach out to us. So, without further ado, let's begin. Our first speaker is Artur Swierczek from the University of Economics in Katowice. His talk is called How the Virus Disruption Spreads in European Supply Chains. Artur Swierczek is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Supply Chain Management at the University of Economics in Katowice, Poland. His scientific activity covers risk management, supply chain resiliency, and forming triadic supply chains. Dr. Swierczek also leads two ongoing research projects involving supply chain network governance and the effects of blockchain technology on supply chain emergence. Artur, I turn this over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. As Tamara said, today I'm going to talk about how the virus of disruption spreads in European supply chain. And it's going to be like more theoretical, conceptual presentation, conceptual piece derived from the outcome of my empirical studies on the transmission and amplification of disruptions in supply chains. All of this study, this empirical study, was conducted a few years ago. It still seems to be vital in current times. Therefore, in my presentation, I would like to conceptually link the concept of the phenomenon of the transmission and amplification of disruptions with the negative effects of coronavirus. That's the major theme of my presentation today. So I'm not going to show you any agenda because we have a very short time for that. I just wanted to present you with the goal, to provide you with the goal of my presentation. So for my presentation, I attempt to show the problems encountered in investigating the transmission and amplification of disruptions driven by the coronavirus in supply chains. As I haven't conducted an empirical study on this issue, especially the transmission and amplification of disruptions driven by the coronavirus, I would like to share with you some conceptual thoughts on that derived from my empirical study on the transmission and amplification of disruption itself. As you can see in my presentation, I have two conceptual constructs here. The first one is the transmission of disruptions, and the other one is the amplification of disruptions. So first, I would like to go ahead and briefly explain those two constructs. So, as in the similar way to the outbreak of the coronavirus leading to the pandemic human disease infection of the disease known as COVID-19, the disruptions in a supply chain infect other companies. As the virus of disruption spreads out to other companies, it may cover only a section of a supply chain or even its entire structure. And here on the figure, you can see how the risk factor emerging from outside, from the environment, as well as from inside the company, may be transmitted to other companies in the supply chain. So we have like 3 companies here in the network, and 3 companies are affected by the negative consequences of risks they're affected directly, and those disruptions are then transferred to other companies in a supply chain. So this is the phenomenon of the transmission of disruption, I mean, here. In order to show this concept in a better way, here you can see the basic structure of the supply chain. So we have the supplier, the producer, and the customer here. And in this case, the supplier is affected by the direct impact of the risk factor. And there are some disruptions in this supplier, in this company, the supplier. And this star manifests the disruption caused by a direct impact of a risk factor. So there is a direct impact, impact the supplier is experiencing from this risk factor. And then this direct impact, these disruptions, and the result of direct impact of certain risk factor is then transferred to other companies. So the producer and customer here, those are two companies that are indirectly influenced by these disruptions. So in this gray field here, there is the transmission of disruptions. So the transmission of disruptions concerns the companies that are indirectly impacted by the certain risk factor. So in this case, there's a producer and customer. So there is this dark black star here, which manifests the disruptions that have been transferred from the supplier to the producer and from the producer to the customer. So this is the basic phenomenon of the transmission of disruptions here. And as you can imagine, the disruptions during transmission can be magnified, can be amplified. So each subsequent link in a supply chain structure can experience the higher strength of the impact of certain disruption. This amplification of disruptions may be referred to as a rolling snowballs because it resembles the rolling snowball. Each company in the supply chain is more and more affected by the negative consequences of certain risk factor. So in this example here, we had the manufacturer located in India, for instance, and there was some malfunction of the infrastructure here at the manufacturer in India. And this malfunction resulted in the amplification of disruptions. And the amplification here you can observe by the increasing delivery delay going from the knitter through the dyer to the clothing manufacturer. So each company here is affecting the supply chain, is affected by the stronger effects of the certain disruptions. And this disruption was caused by the direct impact of the risk here. There was the malfunction of infrastructure at the manufacturer in India. So this is the basic, these are two basic constructs of amplification and transmission of disruptions. So during the transmission, the disruptions may be amplified, so resembling this rolling snowball. So when I talk about the snowball effect, I mean here this rolling snowball manifesting the negative consequences transferred to other companies in a supply chain structure. So juxtaposing, trying to combine those two constructs, like on the one hand side, we have the range of transmission, which can be limited or widespread. We can say about limited range when only two companies are actually involved in the transmission of disruptions. On the other hand side, on the other extreme position, we have widespread disruptions. Widespread disruptions means here that the huge number of companies is actually affected by the certain risk factor. And the second dimension here is the strength of disruptions. So from low to high, we can have not only the amplification of the strength of disruptions going to the other companies, but also we can experience here the mitigation of disruptions. So combining those two criteria and two values for each criteria, we may just list four basic situations. The most challenging for researchers is, of course, the fourth one here, when we deal with widespread disruptions and with the high strength of disruptions. So this is the amplification of disruptions. So we experience here the snowball effect in the transmission to a larger number of firms in the supply chain. So this is the most challenging issue here. And if the disruptions are driven by the coronavirus, it's it's very difficult to distinguish between the transmission and amplification of those disruptions and the direct impact of coronavirus on companies, because as we all know, the coronavirus and its disruptions are of global coverage. So that's why almost the global supply chains, almost all companies in the global supply chains are affected by the coronavirus. Therefore, it makes difficult to distinguish between the phenomenon of the transmission and amplification of disruptions driven by the coronavirus from those disruptions which are actually driven by the direct impact of coronavirus. So basically, we can identify three very important situations here. As you can see, how to identify, how to deal, how to overcome those obstacles connected to the problem of reading the transmission of disruptions caused by the coronavirus. Here, the first issue here is that the effects of the direct impact of coronavirus differ from the disruptions in the snowball effect. So if they are different, there's the way to recognize if we deal with the transmission and maybe amplification of disruptions or not. So when we have to compare the effects of the direct impact from the effects transmitted directly from other companies. So this is the first basic issue, that the disruptions differ. The second very important issue is that the snowball effect occurred among companies in the supply chain operating in different parts of the world. They would make sense if the coronavirus had a more local coverage. Because it has a global coverage nowadays, it's very difficult to find out the companies which are not imposed by the coronavirus. Therefore, almost all companies in global supply chains are more or less affected by the coronavirus. Therefore, it makes it difficult to identify, to read the transmission amplification of disruptions. So in this case, for now, it's really difficult to solve. However, as the vaccination process proceeds and some populations will increasingly gain their herd immunity, there will be some parts of the world which will be free from the coronavirus. So when this happens, hopefully it will happen very quickly, but we don't know still yet because we have many problems with vaccination and vaccines. So if it happens, we will have some part of the companies in some part of the world in the supply chain that are actually not directly affected by the coronavirus because the people, for instance, are vaccinated and they don't need to be afraid of the negative effects. However, in this case, it will be much easier for the companies to read the transmission and amplification of disruptions if they occur, if it happens. So nowadays, this is very difficult to overcome, but in the course of time, it should be much easier to identify. And the third situation, when the strength of disruptions in the snowball effect is clearly higher than the same effects caused by the coronavirus. So even if we have the same disruptions driven by the direct impact of coronavirus and transmitted from other companies, so in this case, if we can identify if those disruptions transferred from other companies, the strength of those disruptions are clearly higher than the same effects caused by the direct impact of risks, that would be easier for us to identify this phenomenon and existing this phenomenon in our supply chain. So here's the first situation, because the first one is difference between the disruptions driven by the direct impact from those driven from indirect impact. So this is the situation here. As you can see, all three companies, supplier, manufacturer, and customer, are exposed to the coronavirus as an external risk factor. And for instance, the supplier is affected by the coronavirus, and here the disruptions driven by the coronavirus has led to staff sickness. So in this company, there was a huge staff sickness, and therefore the supplier was not able to deliver the product to the manufacturer. In this case, again, manufacturer experienced some staff sickness, process. However, some part of the delay from the supplier was because of the snowball effect, halting the manufacturing process, and so on to the customer. So this is the example of the snowball effect here. So again, I don't know if we have more time, but here we have again the situation. In the second situation, the supplier that is exposed to the coronavirus, and however, manufacturing customer. Those are two links that are not exposed to the coronavirus directly, so we can really very distinguish very fast for that the negative effects are transferred from the suppliers. So finally, as a concluding remarks, I would like to show you the cube that indicates those three situations: the similarity of disruptions caused by the direct and indirect effects, range of the impact, and the strength of disruptions. As you can see here, we start off with the global range and high similarity and low strength. So it's the most difficult situation, and this arrowhead goes to the opposite corner of this cube when the identification is easy. Identification of the snowball effect driven by the coronavirus is easy when the strength of the disruptions in the snowball effect is higher. We have low similarity and low and local range of the impact. So as you can see, the snowball effect caused by the coronavirus might be difficult to read as it requires considering environment conditions. The second very important thought is that all companies worldwide are equally exposed to the direct impact of coronavirus. However, similar effects caused by direct and indirect impacts can often obscure the phenomenon of the snowball effect. And the above is particularly sustained when the strength of disruptions caused by the coronavirus is low. This may partially explain why there are problems with reading the snowball effect. And finally, I would like to indicate why reading the snowball effect from the coronavirus is important, because our company can do a lot to prevent the negative effects of coronavirus. However, danger can come from our supply chain partners, which not take enough precautions to defend against coronavirus. So our company has to be aware and stay alert. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation, Artur. I really appreciate it. And now wonderful. And now let's turn our attention to our second speaker. This will be Howard Leedham, MBE from Consilium World Consulting. His talk is the UAE, its positioning as a financial and logistics hub. Howard Leedham, MBE, is a hedge fund manager based in Dubai, offering consultancy services throughout the Middle East and beyond. A former Royal Navy commander and British Special Forces officer, he is also a holder of the only security expert license in the UAE. He will present today on the UAE and its position as a logistics and financial hub. Howard, I turn this over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me okay tomorrow. Yeah? Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Good. Excellent. All right, thank you very much, and thanks for the handover. Good evening, everybody, from the United Arab Emirates. It's 9:15 in the evening here. It's been 30 degrees C and 86 degrees Fahrenheit here today, so it's kind of in the spring. As Tamara alluded to, I've spent the last 10 of the 15 years in the UAE. I'm not an active hedge fund manager now. I did set up the first hedge fund in Dubai, and since then I've spent time in the aviation and finance and security sectors. And you can go to consiliumworld.com to check out the sort of stuff that we do. On the logistics front, I led an airline out here, and on the maritime front, I've gone in there from a security perspective. In terms of COVID and in terms of stability in the United Arab Emirates, they have played it very well, and this has had a knock-on effect in the way that the logistics and the financial sector have coped with the crisis. They went very early on into a lockdown. They have imposed face masks all the way through since last April, compulsory $800 fine if you don't wear a face mask in public, and they are number 3 in the vaccination program, and they are banging out vaccinations like they're going out of fashion. So normal workday, although all the social distancing and all the rest of the stuff is in place, everybody's really working normally, and it's moving along nicely. As you see there, the UAE is nestled between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Oman. And what is the most important thing about the slide here is that you note that the United Arab Emirates actually has two coastlines, one on the inside of the Straits of Hormuz and one on the outside of the Straits of Hormuz. And that is vitally important from a logistics point of view. If we move into the Emirates themselves, you'll see the way where the Emirates are divided here, and not a lot of people realize how big Abu Dhabi is compared to the other Emirates. The Abu Dhabi essentially is the lead emirate or state, if you want to call it that. Just like in the US, the Emirates compete with each other. And what is relevant from a logistic point of view is that Dubai and Abu Dhabi are on the inside of the Straits of Hormuz, whereas you see Fujairah is on the outside of the Straits of Hormuz. And of course, that has impact whenever tensions rise with Iran. The other important aspect about the geography is that, sorry, I'll correct that. The other important aspect from the finance point of view is that the currency here in the UAE is pegged to the US dollar. So whatever the dollar does, the UAE dirham does. And so they've essentially adopted US monetary policy, which makes things much easier in terms of dealing with trade, whether in local currency or in US dollars. They're the seventh largest, have the seventh largest oil reserves in the world, and they're 21st in the transparency ratings. Incidentally, the US is 25th. Now, a lot of people talk about how the UAE has done what it's done since in its young life. It's only 50 years old this year. And a lot of people talk about vision and the vision that's built up this logistics hub that it has become. Well, the reason why it's been able to do this is not because necessarily of the vision and all the good statements that people come out with about the UAE. I think there's one reason, and the one reason is this. The reason how they've been able to develop what they have is through the power of yes. Essentially, this country has said yes to everything that everybody else around it has said no to. So it said yes to religious tolerance. It said yes to not minding that nearly 90% of its population are foreigners. It said yes to Western living and Western dressing standards and even alcohol. And what that has done is caused an influx of industry, logistics, and people into this country, because if you're going to live in the Middle East, then this is probably the most comfortable place to live. Now, this slide here, I show you this slide for a very, as means of demonstration of the way that this country has developed over recent years. This slide was taken in the 80s, somewhere between 81 and 85. And you're seeing, this is Dubai, and you're seeing Sheikh Zayed Road, the road that's the dirt road that you see there. And I want you to take note of the towers in the left-hand side of this photograph. And fast forward then to 2009, so that's, good 12 years ago, and these are the same towers. And so this is the kind of development that Dubai has achieved in the last 25 to 30 years. And as I say, this photo is about 12 years old, and the reason I know that is because Burj Khalifa on the far left of the photograph is not complete, and it was completed in 2010 as the tallest building in the world. So that is the kind of pace that Dubai and the UAE has worked on in order to develop itself as a hub within the Middle East. Now, so far as seaports are concerned, the country has 10 seaports. Of these, arguably, three are relevant, and I've stuck photographs of the three up here. The first one, which is the jewel in the crown of the maritime aspects of Dubai, is Jebel Ali. It's the 10th largest port in the world, and that compares to Los Angeles, which is US's largest port, which is 17th largest in the world. Jebel Ali is now it's got a capacity, although it hasn't fulfilled it yet, to put out 21.1 TEUs per year, 21.1 million rather TEUs per year, 20 foot equivalent units, and around it is a free zone, the Jebel Ali free zone, whereby companies can set up in that free zone, and there's many free zones in Dubai, but this is a logistic one, focused solely on logistics, and within that free zone there are 7,500 companies registered. There are 100 of the Fortune 500 companies, and 135,000 people work to support the operations of and the transit of Jebel Ali port. So it's a massive operation, and it's something. I must say, it's something to behold. And during COVID, although initially slowed down, now it seems that the traffic is now getting back up to I would say that it's not, obviously it's not as busy as it was before, but I would say it's probably getting to about 80% of where it was before, in the way that the UAE is now bouncing back from the crisis. 45 minutes up the road, Abu Dhabi, remember, who is in competition, to put it in a polite way, has built its own port that was just built a few years ago, and that's a much smaller port, but it has ambitions to go up to 15 TEU by 2030. The next relevant port, which is an important aspect in logistics, not only does container traffic, but it also is basically the oil port. There are other oil ports, but this is the one that shifts the crude. And the reason for that is that a few years ago, the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline was piped through to Fujairah, so that it would the oil from the Abu Dhabi would no longer have to ostensibly go through the Straits of Hormuz. So it avoids the trap of the Straits of Hormuz and the problems that it can cause to oil prices when the tensions are ratcheted up with Iran. On the air side of things, the story is equally impressive, although at the moment, because of restrictions around the world, obviously the air operations have been so far as passengers are concerned, have been pulled in substantially. However, cargo operations have actually increased substantially during the crisis. The country, which I'll remind you again, is just the size of the state of Maine, has 7 main airports, of which probably 4 are worthy of mention in this quick run around. The Dubai International Airport, which houses or hosts Emirates Airlines, which is the largest airline in the Middle East and one of the largest airlines in the world. It owns 117 A380 double-decker Airbus, 137 Boeing 777s, and it only falls behind Atlanta, Beijing, and Los Angeles in terms of passenger traffic per year. So it's the 4th in terms of passenger traffic, and it's still, despite the other airports doing cargo in the UAE, it is still 7th in the cargo league for the amount of cargo that it moves. Etihad Airlines is the national airline, and it's smaller than Emirates. They only have 10 380s. They have 39 787s and 5 777s, and they've built a new terminal, which you can see down at the bottom. That's actually an artist's impression, because it's not yet operational, but it will be within the next year, and they're based out of Abu Dhabi. And then the other two worth mentioning, the other 2 airports worth mentioning, which have logistic and passenger relevance, are it's called Al-Mattun Airport, or now it's called Dubai World Central. When this airport was first built, it was intended to be larger than O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Since the financial crisis, they halved that, and now that has become a major cargo hub and charter hub for Dubai. And then finally, Sharjah International, that hosts Air Arabia, which is in competition with Fly Dubai, which are the low-cost airlines, which are really doing the main sort of flights in and out of in and out of Asia and anywhere within 5 hours flight time. Here I've just put up some numbers just to demonstrate the 12.9 million a year coming in from Asia, and you can see the other numbers there. What is significant, I think, here is that the even after the COVID crisis, is that they're still confident of a rebound and growth. China has a huge logistic influence here, a huge trading influence here, and so because China's economy has not suffered as much as perhaps some other areas of the world, is that has really helped the UAE in maintaining the operations tempo of the business of the cargo business and of the passenger business to points east. And you can see down there on the bottom left is that they are predicting 170% growth in the next 20 years, and you can see the GDP numbers there. Now, moving away from the logistics, come over to the money, and in my mind, it takes a lot of courage for any country to look at their laws and say, you know what, our laws are not what they should be, or not where they ought to be, insofar as international contract and international financial transactions. And that is exactly what both Dubai and Abu Dhabi did. And then what they did is they created these two centers, these two financial centers. The first one, Dubai International Financial Center, the second one, Abu Dhabi Global Market. Well, what they've done is they've created, if you like, these two financial Vaticans, whereby Dubai International Financial Center operates under a law that is a hybrid of English and Australian law, and the Abu Dhabi Global Market operates solely under English law. So any banks, any insurance companies, any law companies, if they do contracts within those centers, they come under those laws, and they have their own courts, their own regulators that ensure that everything is done in English, and that people understand the law and the jurisdictions that they're working with. DIFC boasts 2,500 companies, and the ADGM boasts 2,900 companies. That's my 15 minutes and 1 second. So I hope that gives you a pretty quick overview of what I consider to be the logistics hub of the Middle East. Thanks.
Howard, thank you so much for this informative presentation. We really appreciate it. All right, moving on now. Our third speaker is Lenka Veselovská from the Matej University. Her talk will be on supply chain disruptions in the context of global COVID-19 in the Slovak Republic. Lenka Veselovská is an associate professor at the Faculty of Economics at Matej University in the Institute of Managerial Systems in Propad, where she is also the department head. Her research deals with risk management, supply chain management, anti-bribery management systems, and quality management. She has published tens of articles in Slovakia and abroad, and she is the co-author of several textbooks in business practice. She has had a part in implementation of anti-bribery management systems in several public and private organizations. Lenka, I turn this over to you now.
Thank you for the introductions, Tamara. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. So good morning, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where in the world you are right now. For my time zone, it would be good evening, since I am in the heart of Europe, in the Slovak Republic. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this series of lightning talks for inviting me and enabling me to participate, especially the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida. Today, I'd like to talk about briefly about the supply chain disruptions in the context of global COVID-19 pandemic, as observed by the businesses in my country, the Slovak Republic. Obviously, this is such a vast topic that it would take a lot of time if we wanted to cover even half of it. So I'll give you the brief examples from the practice of our businesses, and hopefully you can have a better image of how the supply chains operate in my country. Well, the whole world is currently facing an unprecedented crisis due to COVID-19 pandemic. This situation highlighted the vulnerabilities of supply chains, and some of them were basically shocked by the scale of disruptions they had to face, and they were definitely not prepared to flexibly handle such disruptions especially in my country. Even now, after over a year of living and operating in a world with COVID pandemic, it's still nearly impossible to correctly predict the evolvement of market situation and processes in a business environment, even so far as a few weeks ahead. My country, the Slovak Republic, was at first not significantly impacted neither by the pandemic nor by the consequent economic crisis. Many business managers therefore believed that it was simply the task to endure this for a few short weeks. This was the spring of 2020. However, they seemed to be correct at first, because the summer months in my country were quite normal in terms of the business environment. The situation soon started to change, especially drastically in October of the last year. In my opinion, that was basically the breaking point. I think that was about the time when business owners realized that this crisis is not just going to solve itself anytime soon. And the good news was that they were no longer just forced to implement some minor changes to survive, but finally they became motivated to do so, to evolve, and even to innovate. It is impossible for me to talk about the COVID crisis without discussing, at least briefly, the response of governments and their impacts on the business reality. The Slovak government and governments of other countries in the Europe have played a key role in decision-making processes of these businesses. And basically, the main issue that had the potential to cause significant disruptions in supply chains in my region has been the threat of partial or even total closing of state borders. In 20 or so years, we all got very much used to the state borders being nothing but road signs. At first, this issue was handled correctly from obviously the business point of view. And as I was preparing this information for you, just last week, I was going to give you the examples of how great it was. However, just last week, this situation changed because Germany implemented rigorous controls on their border with Czech Republic, which is the main corridor from and to Slovakia. So far, it has been reported that the delays due to these controls and even some excessive handling have been up to even 12 hours in some cases. Obviously, Slovak transport companies are just starting to deal with this. Some of them even decided to avoid the routes that go through Germany completely, which of course brought on some additional problems. This global pandemic, as we're facing it now, brought on the economic crisis, obviously. So we all know this. However, in my country, in Slovakia, two of its main business industries are car production and tourism. The latter has been struggling significantly since international travel is considerably reduced. And now even the domestic tourism is virtually non-existent since we had lockdown imposed. It could be observed that many of well-established travel agencies went bankrupt, even despite of receiving financial aid from the government. Hotels and other accommodation providers have also been struggling since they had to be completely closed since December of the last year, which makes it about 3 months of not having any incomes. And the winter season, which is the main season of and main source of income for them and other related businesses, is almost over and basically lost. As a result, their suppliers have also been struggling to stay afloat. So far, the other industry, the car production, has managed to successfully deal with this crisis and their supply chain disruptions that this crisis and the pandemic created. No significant delays have been absorbed so far. However, a new problem seems to be arising as of the beginning of this year, 2021. It seems that this problem originates on the demand side of the supply chains with customers that can be labeled as the final consumers. The car sales seem to be drastically decreasing. The COVID crisis is just one of the reasons for this. Many experts believe that it was to be expected since this decrease is a natural part of economic cycle, and this crisis simply accelerated it. However, other reason that could be found is the lack of economic funds that people allocate for buying cars, since their other expenses unfortunately have to take priority currently. Consumers are also more cautious nowadays and prefer to increase their savings. They're basically thinking about the potential risk of unemployment due to this crisis. Since this seems to not just be the issue of Slovak consumers, but also consumers in my region, maybe even worldwide. As a trend, the results show that car production companies will most likely soon have to adjust their production volumes. And this will definitely also impact, unfortunately, negatively their suppliers. Well, we will see how this situation will evolve. It would be interesting to see these outcomes and these changes. Originally, as a preemptive measure, many Slovak enterprises and other companies and businesses, especially production enterprises, decided to briefly increase their stocks of materials or even pooling of resources, since that required also additional transport capabilities. And in many cases, also significant re-engineering of their procurement processes, that used to operate on just-in-time principles. During this time, it was also possible to observe an increase in use of external logistics providers. Recently, a colleague of mine even suggested, as a joke, of course, that we should quit our university jobs and start a logistics or a courier business, since it's obviously such a great business opportunity nowadays, because these are the only organizations or enterprises in my country that seem to be quite profitable right now. Well, we'll see. Obviously, I can talk in length about these and some other negative examples of how COVID impacted supply chains in my country and in my region. However, I prefer to focus on the positive and provide these kinds of examples also. One highly innovative way of dealing with this sort of forced loss of customers that some service enterprises, such as hotels or restaurants, implemented was this sort of a new form of like landing of employees. Waiters, cooks, housekeepers, and other employees from hotels or restaurants were sent to work in production plants. These rather unconventional partnerships have become beneficial to all. Hotels and restaurants had the resources to stay afloat and even cover their costs. Production enterprises did not have to stall their production processes due to lack of healthy employees. And even employees themselves were satisfied to be paid their wages in full, instead of basically staying at home and having reduced wages and nothing else to do. Another example I'd like to share with you is not really some new measure that was implemented. However, this case, in my opinion, represents the spirit of transformation and adaptability that we very much need nowadays. Every year, once a year, this international company called Metro hosts an event for a day for small businesses who are its customers, so that they can promote their products, services, and so on. It is this form of joint production event. Metro is a wholesale organization that focuses mostly on groceries. And this way, this strong partner helps its customers to gain higher visibility and even managed to help them increase their sales. These customers include some small bakeries, small family-owned restaurants, cafes, and other small businesses that procure their raw materials at this company, Metro. It is an example of successful partnership between members of the same supply chain. However, last year was very much different. It had to be, since this event had to change due to pandemic measures. It became not just an event to promote businesses and products and their services, but also to promote COVID-safe environment. From one business day to new initiative, one for you. This way, the strong partner, the supplier, provided aid to its struggling customers needed to stay afloat. This initiative does not just focus on online marketing, but also involves some internal support and obviously legal aid. This special care was given to legal support to facilitate access to government aid through helping them deal with highly bureaucratic process of obtaining this aid. And also they were helped with renegotiations of their long-term contracts. Basically anything to prevent them from closing their businesses. Obviously, these examples prove that COVID crisis affects all businesses and their supply chains, and it will be impossible not to be affected since the global world is so very much interconnected. And we are just learning and discovering how much we depend on each other. So hopefully we'll also be able to learn from each other and focus on the positive throughout this crisis. Well, this concludes my talk today. I would like to thank you for your attention and have a nice rest of the day, and obviously stay safe.
Lenka, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. We really appreciate it. Our next speaker and our fourth speaker is going to be Natalie Hong from the University of Minnesota. Her talk is From Vision to Reality, the Operation of Sustainability. Natalie Hong is an assistant professor of supply chain management and operations at Carlson School of Management in the University of Minnesota. Her teaching interests lie in operations management and strategic sourcing. Her research focuses on sustainable operations and emerging business models, environmental regulations, and supply chain management. Natalie, I turn this over to you now.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I guess that becomes our new norm of greeting. First, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor to join this. And also, it's hugely inspiring to listen to other speakers to share their very interesting work. So as Tamara said, I am Natalie Hong, currently an assistant professor at Carlson School of Management in the University of Minnesota. The topic of my presentation today is From Vision to Reality, the Operationalization of Sustainability. So in the first session of my operations class, we usually define operations as the design and management of the transformation process that turns input into output. That also applies for the concept of sustainability. So in this context, the vision is very clear to us. I'm sure that a lot of us are very passionate about sustainability. Almost every one of us knows what it's about. It's about making our business greener. It's about using resources at a more sustainable way. It's about reducing emissions, reducing pollution. But then in reality, to actually achieve this goal, we need to build some infrastructure. We need to establish a system. In other words, we need an operationalization process to actually put it into practice and eventually achieve the goal. So the main theme of my presentation is to highlight the importance of making the operational decisions, even if it seems really about small details, the nuances involved. To that end, I'm going to use two examples. One is about environmental regulation, specifically on e-waste disposal, and the other one is more of a for-profit context to talk about how about the operationalization process for emerging business models such as car sharing programs. So as you can see, the talk is less specific about COVID or the pandemic. It's more of a general discussion. So looking at this chart, I'm sure that many of you recognize or own a few of those, or even all of these different phone models. I mean, the technology is advancing very quickly. We definitely benefit from them. It makes our life easier. It makes our life more convenient. But when it comes to the day where we have to dispose it and replace it with a newer one, it becomes a burden to us. We have to find a place for the disposal. Some of you may have a drawer full of the old phones. And it also poses a serious burden to the environment because a lot of these products contain highly toxic substances like PVC, lead, mercury, cadmium, to name just a few. So for the environment, it has to tolerate not just the phone disposal, but a lot of other e-waste, as small as batteries, as large as washer dryers. So I think the figure may give you a better idea about the magnitude of the problem. This is a study done by a subsidiary of UN that shows in 2019, on average, every one of us is disposing more than 7 kilograms of e-waste. And it's also projected that the total number could reach more than 74 metric tons in 2030. So it is beyond doubt that this is a severe problem. We need to do something about it. And a key player is regulatory efforts. That's why in the following discussion, we're going to look a bit deeper into the environmental regulation for e-waste. So in this context, the vision is clear and loud for us. We want to do better, to have better end-of-life product treatment. The next question then is, how do we turn this vision into a reality? Again, we need to operationalize it by building the infrastructure, building the system. So actually, the first operationalization question already has emerged, because although our ultimate goal seems straightforward, better end-of-life product treatment, but in implementation, in reality, it could mean a lot of different options. For example, landfilling, or recycle. Recycle seems to be a good option because a lot of these items like phones, they have a very high concentrate of rare metals. So the recoverable value could be 7 times higher than if we mined ores. So that could be one option. Or instead of recycling on a material level, we can also choose to reuse on the product unit level, or even deal with the problem at the source to reduce consumption. So I think we start to already see some nuances here. We start from this simple concept of end-of-life product treatment, but then it could actually unfold into at least multiple categories of options. The question then becomes, what should legislation focus on? Well, obviously not landfilling. Reduce is more about market dynamics, less directly tied to end-of-life product treatment. So this one is temporarily set aside as well. How about reuse? It sounds like a great option in theory, because it gives the second life of a product unit. The same product can serve multiple customers. So the overall demand could be lower. So the raw material extraction, the emission and pollution associated with manufacturing, associated with end-of-life disposal could all be reduced. Again, great in theory. How about implementation? Well, we start to see some challenges because in reality, the reuse option could open up a can of worms and could easily be taken advantage of by many firms, because the regulation is going to cover a large variety of different products. It is extremely challenging, if at all possible, to clearly clarify a reusable condition. Without this clear definition, firms can take advantage of the reuse option to actually export e-waste. And this problem is exactly what we are seeing in reality. It is estimated that about 10% to 40% of e-waste in the US are exported to somewhere else in the world. Obviously, it's undesirable because it's basically a leakage of the regulatory system in the US. The regulation intends to cover all the e-waste production that are generated here, but because of the export, now is hiding. Now they are hidden somewhere else, another corner of the world. It is also harmful to the importing area because they cannot have access to technology because these products are beyond reuse. However, at the same time, they will have to bear the externality, the environmental burden of the disposal. Even if the importing areas were to recycle these products, because they typically have a lower technological capability, the recycling can only be done at very low efficiency, and workers may have to work without, say, protective gear, with their bare hands. So there's a huge burden both to the public health and the environment to the importing country. That is why when we start to think about realizing a concept, we start to see how the operational detail matters. And because of the same reason, we use it's extremely difficult to operationalize. That also explains the reason why the majority of e-waste regulation mainly focus on recycling. Okay? So I hope that this serves as a first example where a simple concept can mean a lot of different options, a lot of different trade-offs in reality. But that's not all, because we have to answer more operationalization questions as well. The next one is, well, obviously collection and recycling is not free. Who should then pay for this cost? Naturally, there are at least three options. Maybe consumers should pay for it, maybe governments should pay for it, or manufacturers. I'm sure with the smart group of audience like yourself, we can come up with justifications for almost every one of these options. For a customer, with customer payment, it increases the awareness. So it helps to reduce impulse purchases. If the costs have to be borne by government, the responsibility is more clearly defined. So usually the administration can be done in a more efficient way. But again, in reality, if we look into the operational details, we will realize that if we assign the responsibility to manufacturer, it can generate an additional benefit because manufacturer is the only entity among the stakeholders who have access to not just end-of-life management of the product, but they're dealing with the product early in the life cycle. They're designing the product already. So if they have the responsibility, they will have stronger incentive to design more sustainable products. In other words, if a manufacturer knows it has to pay for the collection and recycling, it will start to make the product more recyclable, use more recyclable material, or make it more durable. So that is the added benefit of this obligation assignment if we choose the manufacturer. And that is also why the extended producer responsibility approach is a dominant approach for almost all the existing regulation for e-waste. It is used here in the US. 25 out of all the 26 states that have some sort of electronic waste regulation use or assign the responsibility mainly to manufacturers, with the only exception of California, not surprisingly. They also ask customers to pay. It is used in Europe, China, and Australia. It's widely covering not just e-waste and other product category as well. For example, battery, packaging waste, or pharmaceuticals. So now we have at least answered two operationalization questions. Who pays? What's the objective? Again, the list is longer than that. Now we know that we ask customers to pay, but how about the infrastructure or the collection and recycling system? One option is we can build a collective system, meaning we ask all our manufacturers who are involved, who are selling some products, to come together to join the effort of collection and recycling. Well, again, it sounds like a great idea in theory because the aggregation helps to achieve the economies of scale. You are processing in bulk, so the unit processing cost would be lower. In other words, we achieve cost effectiveness. However, again, implementation is more complicated than that because, remember, one goal of EPL is to generate some design incentive. However, if a firm, say firm A, designs very recyclable product to lower the recycling costs, but if this company has to operate under a collective system, meaning at the same time, this company is also processing products from other brands with other designs, it means the company have to shoulder the higher recycling costs from the clumsier was designed from other brands as well. So in this process then, the collective system would compromise or weaken the individual design incentive. This leads to another option. We can alternatively establish an individual system where each brand is responsible for their own product. It could help to achieve technological efficiency because the product like Apple knows the design of their products better, so they can dismantle it more efficiently, also knows what materials could be recycled. So collective versus individual system, we're trying to basically reconcile the trade-off between cost and technological efficiency. That's another example of why the operational details or decisions matter. Again, not the end. Let's take a look at the network. For the collection and recycling network, again, we could have different options. One is to build a centralized network, meaning a central authority, usually the local government, can help design and establish the entire system. The central government would choose the collector, would identify the recycler, will also set the service charge. All the way to the other end of the extreme, we could have market-based network, meaning every individual manufacturers can find their own suppliers, their own collectors and recyclers. So in this case, why does it matter? Because if we have a centralized network, again, from an administrative perspective, it's great because the responsibility is clearly defined. We can guarantee that we're only using qualified collectors and recyclers. However, this takes away the market dynamic. The collector, the assigned collectors and recyclers, they are not competing with any outside players. Whereas the market-based network is actually taking advantage or utilizing the competition because when a collector or recycler have to compete with the peer company to win the contract from individual manufacturers, they may be able to offer a lower service charge or offer better service. So again, a trade-off in this particular operationalization detail between centralized and market-based network. We're trying to trade off between the administrative effectiveness versus the benefit, lower cost or higher service quality coming from market competition. So I hope that gives you some examples or illustrations of how these operationalization details on the ground matters. But of course, there are other questions as well. For the sake of time, I'm going to just leave it or stop here for the regulatory discussion, because I would also like to show you, I'll talk about why operationalization process also matter in a for-profit context, about car sharing specifically. So car sharing to replace car ownership sounds like a great idea, again, from both individual customers' point of view. It's cheaper than buying a car, it's more convenient. I can use it on the go or just when I need it. It's also a good business model from the environmental perspective because every car unit can be utilized by multiple customers. So the higher utilization means only fewer car units are needed. So it could be lead to or help reduce the environmental burden. But there's also concern that as car sharing service becomes cheaper, maybe there's a rebound effect. More customers are using the service, like those who used to walk may join or start using car rides because it's actually affordable. So eventually, this could lead to a higher overall emissions at the end. This is a problem, but again, if we pay enough attention to the operational details, we could leverage at least one of them in fleet management. Specifically, if we can be smart about choosing the vehicle age limit, maybe that could help us to solve the problem. So imposing a vehicle age limit meaning we're only allowing cars of say within 5 years or within 7 years, to provide the car sharing service. This will help or can be leveraged by the firm to adjust the price and service quality of ride sharing to prevent or control over expansion of car sharing usage. At the same time, because some of the mid-age car has to be retired from the servicizing fleet into the second-hand market. They have to be sold as used cars. So in this case, it also opens up another consumer opportunities. They can buy a cheaper second-hand car. So all these, with the properly set vehicle age limit, can help to rationalize the market segmentation and eventually provide both economic viability, more convenience for people's transportation or provide mobility, but at the same time helps to control the overall environmental impact. So for the sake of time, although I'm only giving short examples, but I think that already illustrates or reviews how first, operationalization detail matters to make sure that we can transform a vision, a high-level goal, into a working system. Second takeaway is if we can appropriately make these operational decisions, it ensures that we can build a more efficient system and also opens up better or more business opportunities. So this is where I would like to stop. Thank you again for your time and also the organizers. Thank you and take care.
Thank you so much, Natalie. We really appreciate this excellent presentation. Our next speaker, and this will be our last speaker, is Sam Kaplan from Highline College. He is going to speak on accessible, affordable, and hands-on, follow the supply chain study abroad to Vietnam. Sam Kaplan is the director of the Center of Excellence for Global Trade and Supply Chain Management at Highline College. The center connects industry and education in Washington State around workforce development issues. He wrote and co-produced the short film about customer service, Please Hold, and is author of the novel Munsrat Lives. His new book about China and America, Challenging China, Smart Strategies for Dealing with China in the Xi Jinping Era, will be published in April. Sam, I turn this over to you.
Thanks, Tamara. I very much appreciate it. And thanks to all the organizers. I assume everybody can see the slide on the screen. I'm the director, she said, the Center of Excellence for Global Trade and Supply Chain Management, which brings together industry and education on workforce development issues. We're located at Highline College, which is just south of Seattle, but we serve all of Washington State. In 2019, we partnered with 4 colleges, Highline, Wenatchee Valley College, North Seattle College, and Tacoma Community College, to develop and organize a follow supply chain study abroad mission, which would be inclusive with a hands-on academic focus on supply chains. Most participants in study abroad programs come from a wealthy socioeconomic demographic. They often look like younger me's. We wanted to change that. Many study abroad programs are only culturally focused, and many of these go to old-time cultural hotspots like Paris. Not that there's anything wrong with Paris, which I too like to visit, but we wanted to change the typical study abroad destination as well. We wanted our participants to reflect the diverse society that we live in. We wanted this trip to travel to places that are relevant to an academic focus and to our state's economy. We wanted to provide a hands-on, up-close look at supply chains that would provide something different than what students can get in a classroom. Although we're taking advantage of a pandemic-induced break from travel to continue to evolve and improve the program, we achieved those goals fairly successfully in our 2019 trip. So briefly, who are these 4 institutions? Highline is the most diverse student body in Washington State and one of the most diverse in the country. Wenatchee Valley is just across the Cascade Mountains and is in the center of Apple Country. North Seattle is, surprisingly enough, located in the north part of the city and has a strong international business program. And Tacoma Community College, depending on the traffic, is about a 35-minute or an hour-and-a-half drive south of Seattle. And nearby, the Port of Tacoma is the largest container port in the area and plays a big role with what Tacoma Community College does. We treated the 2019 trip as a pilot program, and it is now a permanent evolving fixture of the 4 colleges. We partnered with businesses in a variety of ways, including, as I'll describe in more detail later, receiving sponsorship from them to defray the cost of the trip to the students. So we only charged $500 for students. That's right, $500 for a 10-day international trip to Vietnam. That includes international flights, hotels, ground transportation, and most of the meals. It also included 2 trips within Washington State. It is, as we said in advertising the program to students, the deal of a lifetime. And we had 16 students participate, 4 from each college during the trip. The goal was to follow product supply chains to Vietnam and from Vietnam. We chose Washington State apples. Yep, apples grown in Wenatchee, and Brooks running shoes. Brooks Sports is headquartered in Seattle, and their shoes are assembled in a factory in Vietnam. So why do we choose supply chains as the academic focus for the trip? Because it's a huge industry for our region and our state. There's more than 170,000 people working in global trade and supply chains in Washington. That's more than in aerospace, even though Boeing Commercial Airplanes is headquartered in the Seattle area, and almost as many as in IT, even though Amazon, Microsoft, and thousands of other IT companies are headquartered or located in the Seattle area. And companies such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter have major presences there. Of course, many people working in supply chain work for these companies. These companies do supply chains, obviously. And global trade and supply chain jobs, they pay very good wages. Perhaps even more important, you don't have to be a software engineer or have a PhD to get them. These are good family wage jobs. They're obtainable by going to community college, 4-year schools, or in some cases, just getting technical training. And these kinds of jobs, this kind of work, it lends itself to up-close studies outside of the classroom. So that's why we decided on a follow the supply chain study abroad program. So as I said, we did trips in Washington before going to Vietnam. First, we went to Brooks headquarters. There, the students saw how the shoes are designed and its high-tech methods using motion capture technology, like is used in the Marvel or Lord of the Rings movies, and allowing the engineers to see how the shoes bend on different people's feet as they run. Our students also learned about how the shoes are designed sustainably, including that the shoes are mainly recyclable. They also learned about logistics, shipping, and trade compliance, how the parts get to Vietnam and then are assembled there, and the process one must follow to bring the shoes into the United States, Europe, and other places where the shoes are sold. And the people who spoke and met with the students from Brooks talked about how and why they ended up in their careers. In fact, our students had lunch with the Brooks employees who spoke to them up on the rooftop dining area. The students were excited to understand the many different opportunities in supply chain, and they really loved that food and dining area. It was eye-opening for them. We also drove over to Wenatchee, about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive from Seattle. We went to the orchards and saw how apples are grown and how that is done with high technology as well, using genetics to data-driven watering systems to all the other high tech they use to grow apples. We toured a packaging facility that is also high tech and learned how apples are sorted and packaged into boxes and then put into cold storage. Cold storage has become much more famous during vaccines, but our students saw it up close over a year ago. And then the apples are transported by truck to the ports and from there shipped by container to Vietnam. So after understanding the supply chain in Washington, we traveled to Vietnam. In Vietnam, we studied and toured the ports where those container ships arrived just south of Ho Chi Minh City. And then they go by barge or truck to the wholesale market. And we toured that main produce wholesale market of Ho Chi Minh City, where everyone from large supermarket chains to neighborhood stores to produce carts in the street buy their produce. And there we met with a family which has a wholesale business and sells Washington State apples. In fact, one of our students also works for an apple company in Wenatchee in addition to going to school. You can see him there on the far right. He saw his company's apples being sold in the market and his eyes just lit up. He was so excited to see what he had worked on in little old Wenatchee being sold all the way over in Vietnam. The owner of the wholesale business our students visited with, she has her business is just really across the street from the market. She had started with a small cart on the streets of Saigon 30 years ago, not bigger than the desk that I'm sitting at right now. And now she has this large business. We had tea and fruit with her family in the fancy house and office that she has. Some of her kids now go to Cambridge in England, Boston University in Boston. Our students, most of which came from tougher backgrounds, but perhaps not as challenging as that woman's was decades ago, saw what is possible for their futures. We toured the ports, and we also toured the Brooks Shoe Factory and met with the managers of the factory, as well as talked with workers there and toured all aspects of the operation. Again, we saw the high technology that goes into assembling shoes, learned about the complicated supply chain of components and the supply chain of talent. Both the workers in Vietnam who are moving their way up the economic ladder, and Vietnam itself, which is moving up the economic value chain in world economics. Of course, we didn't just study supply chain, as important that is, and in Vietnam. We also learned more about the country, its culture, its people, and its history. Why did we choose Vietnam? Well, it's one of the top 5 trading partners through Washington ports. There's a large Vietnamese population in Washington, including many Vietnamese Americans studying at the 4 colleges. And of course, Vietnam has become a major alternative to China for assembly and supply chains. And frankly, nowadays, it's an easier place to work with than China for a variety of reasons. They talked about my book in the introduction. Thank you very much. I'm contractually obligated to mention my book by my publisher. We met with the US consulate while we were in Vietnam. It was interesting to see our students learn about the various work these consulates do, from commercial counselors to ag experts to diplomatic and visa work. A couple of the students, who again came from underprivileged backgrounds, told me they had no idea such careers were a possibility. When we got back to Seattle, we had lunch at their request, and they peppered me with questions about how one can have these kinds of careers. The trip opened up new horizons for our students. We also spent most of the day at National University in Ho Chi Minh City. Our students spent the day with a group of Vietnamese students, learning about each other, working on projects together, and discussing issues in common. They hit it off so much that throughout the rest of the stay, they often got together in the evenings and have been staying in touch over social media ever since they've returned. We piggybacked other activities for the colleges while we were there, including an international recruitment event. As long as we had faculty and staff so many miles away in this up and coming market, we wanted to take advantage of that to build new partnerships and strengthen existing ones with our Vietnamese partners. And we want to take advantage of the opportunity to also recruit international students. International students are a major export for the United States. We were killing many birds with our study abroad stone. The faculty and staff peeled off during an open afternoon and did presentations to potential international students. At the time, the previous US presidential administration was rejecting about 50% of visa requests of Vietnamese hoping to study at Washington schools. But we laid the groundwork that trip, and with a new US administration in place, we're hopeful more students, after the pandemic is over, will come to our schools from Vietnam. We surveyed the students after the trip, and we received great feedback, as you can see here. Again, the students we brought in this trip don't ordinarily have the chance to participate in study abroad for cost and other reasons. In fact, one of the questions in the application form was to ask if they had traveled internationally before. It was not a disqualifying factor if they had traveled, but we did try to bring students who never had the opportunity to travel internationally before, and this would help them in their supply chain careers after they graduate. Getting sponsors was key to making the program accessible. It's why we're able to only charge $500 per student. To get sponsors, you need to do outreach to your business and community. The Center of Excellence I work for helped create that bridge. Remember, our center connects colleges and industry around workforce development issues. As you can see, we involved our sponsors in the program, and they helped connect us to organizations and companies in Vietnam and in Washington that we needed access to create a robust agenda for our students. So not only do we get some funding, but we also got a lot of help and connections. We kept our sponsors informed throughout our work. We even, as you see here, made banners featuring our sponsors and took photos with our students in Vietnam to thank them. And by the way, not all our sponsors were businesses. The University of Washington, including the Center for Global Affairs and Cyber, were key supporters of our program. And thank you, Tamara, for that support. We very much appreciate it. Although we could not bring a group to Vietnam in September 2020 because of COVID-19, we're continuing to build the program. We created a virtual textbook chapter based on the trip that faculty at the colleges are currently using. We're working to build up the academic piece more, assigning more readings and holding more pre-trip meetings. In 2019, we held one pre-trip briefing before the trip. In the next trip, we'll have 2 or 3 or 4 meetings, even if some of them are done virtually like we're doing here. We're learning in the age of Zoom. And we'll bring in more experts to talk with the students and give the students a better grounding in the topics they will study and companies and organizations and places they will see. Even before they go on the trip, they'll understand them better. And we're going to bring additional faculty on the trip in addition to the faculty and staff that are organizing the trip. These faculty will have a parallel but occasionally intersecting agenda. They will help to globalize our schools when they come back and provide a strong bench of people who can do this work going forward. And we're working to recruit students earlier when it's possible to do so, to cast our nets wider as we continue to seek a diverse student participation group. Jason Meyers, who you see on the right in this photo, is an amazing guy. Zoe on the left is amazing as well. But let me tell you Jason's story. He was laid off from a furniture store a few years ago, and while he was working there, he became fascinated by the supply chain for furniture. He got so fascinated, he enrolled in Highline Supply Chain Program and eventually applied for our Study Abroad program. He was one of our student group leaders, and he asked great questions during the trip. As an aside, in a previous life, I organized many business delegations with business people and elected leaders going to foreign markets. I can tell you our students asked far better questions than any of those business people or politicians. Anyway, a few months after we got back from the trip, Jason noticed Brooks had an opening for a temporary position in trade compliance. Brooks's trade compliance staff person actually talked to us during the trip, and she was pregnant at the time. And now Brooks wanted to find someone to do her work while she was on maternity leave. Jason applied, got an interview, and during the interview talked about all he had learned on the trip, including during the visit to Brooks. Long story short, Jason got the job and started working at Brooks. Now, I don't know if every trip we do will translate directly to a job for a student, but I do know we provide an opportunity for students who would not ordinarily be able to afford to go and study abroad, to study the supply chain up close, build their networks and their horizons, and have a greater chance to be successful going forward. Now we just need to get everybody vaccinated so we can resume these trips. Maybe we need to organize a follow the vaccine study abroad program. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks again for the organizers for this. I learned a lot from the other presenters, so really, really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sam, for this informative presentation. This concludes the formal portion of our program. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you, as do all my colleagues, to all of you listeners and viewers for joining us, to our speakers for sharing their expertise, their talents, and their enthusiasm for global supply chains, and also to the U.S. Department of Education. We are especially grateful to them because without Title VI funding for national resource centers, we would be unable to provide this program to you. So thank you all very much. Thanks for joining us. Check out our respective centers, get in touch with our presenters, and we hope to see you at another presentation or talk. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you on behalf of all of us.